Sometimes, a single act of kindness doesn't just change one life, it rewrites the destiny of everyone it touches. When a struggling single father stopped to help a frail old woman no one else would even look at, he had no idea she carried a secret that would transform his world forever. If you believe in second chances, quiet miracles, and the kind of love that grows where no one's looking, this story is for you. If stories like this speak to your heart, don't forget to subscribe. It helps us share more moments that matter and more kindness the world needs. Now, let me tell you what happened. The wind in Ashbury that morning was cruel, not the howling kind that tore through streets and stirred panic, but the quieter sort that seeped through sleeves and slipped down spines, biting from the inside out. It was late winter, the season when snow lost its charm, and sidewalks turned into crusted mosaics of salt and regret. People moved briskly through Main Street collars, up, eyes down, minds fixed on the next coffee or errand. No one noticed the small, stooped figure at the edge of the sidewalk, standing still beneath the faded green awning of Joe's Bakery. She wore an overcoat that had once been navy, but was now the color of dishwater. Her hair, snow-white and wispy, barely clung to the wind as she looked around, confused. One gloved hand clutched a worn leather handbag. The other trembled as she reached out toward a woman pushing a stroller. "Excuse me." Her voice cracked like old vinyl. The woman didn't stop, didn't glance. She veered right, pulling her child with her, murmuring something without making eye contact. The old woman's hand hovered in the air, then slowly dropped. Her breath fogged in front of her, the only sign she was still part of the living. She tried again. A teenager on a skateboard. A man in a gray suit with a Bluetooth in one ear. A couple arguing in hushed tones. She raised her voice, pleading now. "Please. I'm trying to get home. I think I'm lost." No one heard, or they pretended not to. A delivery truck roared by. Slush splattered her shoes. She stumbled back, her knees buckled, and then she sank slowly to the cold pavement, as if her body finally realized no one was coming. Across the street, Daniel Brooks had just stepped out of O'Reilly's auto supply, clutching a bag of engine parts. The wind slapped his face. He looked up and saw her. At first he thought she'd fallen. Then he realized no. She wasn't crying for help anymore. She'd stopped. People were still walking, still stepping around her, still pretending they didn't see the old woman collapsed at the edge of the curb. And something inside Daniel broke. It wasn't just about her. It was about the time 2 years ago when he'd stood in an ER lobby clutching his son's medical file, begging for a doctor to listen, and they didn't. It was about the job interviews, where they smiled until they saw the single father box checked, about the nights he'd cried in the garage so his son wouldn't hear. He dropped the bag and crossed the street. Fast. When he reached her, her eyes blinked open, startled, wet, and dull. "It's okay," he said, kneeling beside her. "I see you." She blinked again. Are you with the police?" "No, ma'am. I'm Daniel. I'm just a guy. But I'm not leaving you here." He pulled off his coat and wrapped it around her shoulders gently, like she might break. Her skin was paper-thin and cold as porcelain. Her lips trembled, but she didn't resist. "Can you stand?" he asked softly. She shook her head. "I've been out here. Too long. No one would stop. I thought maybe I'd disappear." Daniel looked up. Still people walked, watched from a distance. Not one stepped closer. He gritted his teeth, not in anger, but in sorrow. "All right," he whispered. "Then we go together." He jogged around the corner and returned with an old silver bicycle, the kind with a metal rack over the back tire, the paint chipped and rust flaking. He set the bike down and turned back to her. "This isn't much," he said, "but it's all I've got." She offered a faint, almost imperceptible smile. He lifted her slowly, gently, and helped her sit sideways on the rack. He wrapped a scarf around her for support, checked her balance, then climbed on. "Hold tight. I don't think I have the strength," she whispered. "You don't need to," he replied. "I've got enough for both of us." And then he pedaled through Ashbury's icy streets, past the curious stares, past the hushed whispers. Somewhere between the bakery and the outskirts of town, a young boy watching from a corner, Grocery ran up and handed her a warm muffin. A woman stepped from her porch, covering her mouth, then ran back inside and emerged with a knit blanket. It wasn't much, but it was enough to remind Daniel he wasn't alone. As they rolled down Maple Drive, the old woman leaned her head against his back and whispered, "You're the first person who looked at me today and didn't look away." Daniel's throat tightened. He couldn't speak, but in that moment the biting wind felt warmer and the weight on his bicycle felt a little lighter. They reached his small home near the edge of town, a one-story rental with cracked shutters and a yard full of hopeful weeds. He parked the bike, helped her down, and opened the front door. His 12-year-old son, Lucas, stood in the hallway clutching a comic book. Lucas stared. "Dad? Who's that?" Daniel turned, his voice low but firm. "She's someone who needs us." The old woman sat quietly at Daniel's kitchen table, her gloved hands wrapped around a chipped mug of chamomile tea. She hadn't said a word in several minutes. Her eyes faded blue, like a washed-out summer sky, wandered the room slowly, as if mapping out a space she didn't expect to find herself in. Lucas sat across from her feet, barely touching the floor, elbows on the table, head tilted in curiosity. He wasn't afraid, just puzzled. He'd seen his father bring home injured birds, a stray dog once, even a shivering runaway boy who stayed 2 nights before heading out again. But this was different. "Do you know her name?" Lucas whispered, eyes locked on his father. Daniel leaned against the kitchen counter, arms crossed, trying to gather what little he knew. "She said she's lost. That's all." Lucas frowned. "Like lost. Like Alzheimer's." Daniel glanced at the woman. She didn't flinch at the word. Her gaze had settled on the small vase of wildflowers on the windowsill, dandelions Lucas had picked last week. Maybe Daniel replied. Or maybe she's just been ignored for so long that she doesn't know where she belongs anymore. The woman blinked and turned to him. "I remember tea," she said softly, as if testing her own voice. "My husband used to brew it every evening. Rooibos mostly, but sometimes chamomile when I couldn't sleep." Lucas lit up. "What was his name?" She paused, a long pause. "Henry," she said, finally, her lips curling upward just slightly. "Henry Langford." Daniel's eyes flicked toward Lucas, then back to her. "Langford. That's a nice name." She nodded, then let out a breath that sounded half like a sigh, half like a prayer. It used to be. The day passed slowly. Daniel made soup from a can and grilled cheese on the skillet, one of the few things he'd mastered since becoming a full-time parent. The woman ate slowly, politely chewing, as if each bite required her full concentration. Later, Daniel set up the old armchair in the living room with extra blankets. She thanked him, voice barely above a whisper, then curled into the chair like a child seeking shelter. Lucas sat beside his father in the hallway. "She doesn't seem dangerous." Daniel gave a tired chuckle. "I think we're the dangerous ones in her story. What if she has family? We'll find out in the morning. I'll call the sheriff's office. Someone's got to be looking for her." Lucas hesitated. "Dad. Yeah, you cried. When you found her." Daniel turned. You saw that Lucas nodded. "I've only seen you cry once before. When Mom died." Daniel's shoulders dropped. The silence between them stretched. "It wasn't just her I saw out there." "Luke," he finally said. "It was every moment people looked right through me. It brought something up. I don't know. Maybe I'm tired of seeing people fall through the cracks." Lucas leaned his head on his father's arm. "I'm glad you stopped." Daniel wrapped an arm around his son. "Me too, buddy. Me too." The next morning, Daniel awoke early. The air smelled faintly of toast and honey. He blinked confused and shuffled toward the kitchen. The old woman stood at the stove, humming. She wore one of Daniel's old flannel shirts rolled up at the sleeves, her back straight, hands moving with practiced rhythm. "I hope you don't mind," she said without turning. The boy mentioned he liked honey on toast. Daniel blinked. "I don't mind." "Not at all." She turned, then offering a shy smile. "You remember more today," he noted gently. "A bit?" She nodded. "Mornings are kinder to me. Nights steal things. But mornings, they give back." He stepped into the kitchen. "I was going to call the sheriff today. Maybe someone's reported you missing." She didn't respond right away. Then very softly, "They didn't lose me. They left me." Daniel felt a weight settle in his chest. "You don't have to explain. Not now." She smiled. "You're a good man, Daniel. How do you know my name?" She gestured toward the envelope pinned to the fridge with a magnet. "Lucas's report card. He's a smart boy." Daniel smiled, a little embarrassed. "He gets that from his mother." They sat down together. Lucas joined them moments later, eyes still foggy from sleep. "Morning," he said, and the woman greeted him with a plate of toast. "Thank you," he mumbled, then added, "You're kind of awesome, you know that." She laughed, a warm, surprised laugh that seemed to crack open something long frozen. "I used to be," she said. "You still are," Lucas replied. And he meant it. Later that day, Daniel called the sheriff's office and local care facilities. No one had a missing persons report matching her description. He posted a message on the Ashbury Town Board, asking gently if anyone recognized a kind woman with a calm voice and fading memories. No answers came. That evening, as Daniel helped her settle in again, he said, "You know, I never did ask what to call you." She looked at him, her eyes clearer than they'd been the day before. "You can call me Greta." Daniel nodded. "Nice to meet you, Greta." She smiled softly. "You're the first person who said that to me in years." Ashbury was the kind of town where most people locked their doors, not because they feared crime, but because they feared vulnerability. There was an unspoken etiquette of distance, an inherited caution that came with small-town pride. Don't pry, don't linger, and above all, don't invite trouble. But Daniel Brooks had never been one for rules written in invisible ink. It was Saturday morning, and sunlight crept across the creaky floorboards of the modest home he shared with Lucas. Greta sat on the front porch in Daniel's old flannel sipping tea from a thermos, while birds chirped in the maple tree overhead. The air held the clean scent of thawing earth. Inside, Lucas was attempting to make pancakes. "Dad," he called from the kitchen, "do we have any baking powder?" Daniel glanced up from the living room floor, where he was sorting bolts for a carburetor job. Top shelf behind the coffee filters. Lucas rummaged. Why do adults always put important stuff in hard-to-reach places to keep kids from turning pancakes into science experiments? Greta chuckled softly from the porch. It had been 3 days since she arrived, and her presence had become something like sunlight. Subtle, steady, warming the cold places of their routine. Lucas emerged with a bowl of batter and a look of restrained excitement. "She likes maple syrup, right?" Daniel nodded. "She likes that you ask." They ate breakfast on the porch, passing syrup and stories between bites. Greta spoke more now, not just about her husband Henry, but about things that came back to her in flashes, like the scent of hospital corridors, the feel of silk scarves, and the music of Glenn Miller on vinyl. Lucas was captivated. "You were a doctor. I don't know," she replied thoughtfully. "Maybe I was just someone who wore the coat." Daniel watched her carefully. The more she spoke, the more she revealed not just about the past, but about a mind that still burned beneath the fog. Later that afternoon, Daniel offered to take her to the farmer's market. Greta agreed with one caveat: only if we take the bicycle again. You serious? He laughed. I haven't felt that free in years. She smiled. So they did. Daniel tightened the rear rack, added cushions, and a safety belt, fashioned from an old backpack strap, and pedaled her slowly through the market path as vendors waved, onlookers stared, and whispers filled the air. That's the woman from the photo, someone whispered. She's real. I heard she used to be a surgeon. Greta didn't flinch. She waved back, smiled, received a small bouquet of violets from a child whose mother had once been Greta's patient, though no one yet knew that. Daniel bought carrots and fresh rolls, then parked the bike so Greta could stretch her legs. He watched her with a protective curiosity, as if trying to solve a puzzle with no edges. An older man stepped forward. She yours? Daniel straightened. She's staying with me, just until we find her family. The man nodded. That photo of you two went viral, got folks talking. Daniel's jaw tightened. Not sure I like being talked about. Not all talk's bad, the man said. Some of us forgot what decency looked like. You reminded us. That evening they returned home to find a casserole dish waiting on the front steps. A note beside it read, "For the woman with the brave smile and the man with the bigger heart." Lucas opened the lid. It's lasagna, the good kind with sausage. Greta looked down at the dish, blinking back emotion. People remembered me. No, Daniel said. They're remembering themselves. They ate together at the small wooden table beneath the humming kitchen light. Greta told Lucas how to balance pepper and oregano. Lucas taught her how to play checkers on an old worn board missing a red piece. Daniel watched them, elbows on the table heart somewhere between awe and ache. This wasn't what he expected when he helped her off the street, but maybe it was what they all needed. That night, long after Lucas had gone to bed and the dishes had been washed, Greta lingered in the doorway of the living room. "Can I ask you something?" she said. Daniel looked up from the couch where he was half listening to an old baseball game. "Of course." "Why did you stop that day, when no one else did?" He thought for a moment, then turned off the TV. "Because I've been invisible too." She nodded, eyes soft. "I wasn't sure if I was still real. Until you looked at me." Daniel's throat tightened. "You were real the whole time. The world just stopped noticing." Greta stepped forward, knelt beside him, and gently pressed something into his hand. It was a small round pendant. On one side, it was engraved with the initials HL. On the other, a single word: return. Daniel looked at her. "What is this? I used to wear it when I traveled," she said. "In case I got lost. Henry had one too. I think this was his." He closed his fingers around it. "I'll help you find your way back," he said. Greta smiled. "You already have." It happened on a Tuesday. Daniel remembered because Tuesday was the one day of the week he didn't have to take the truck into town. No repairs to rush, no school pickup lines, no errands. Just the sound of wind nudging the blinds and the quiet peace of a house at rest. Lucas had stayed home that morning, curled up on the couch under a fleece blanket, pale and breathless. The color had drained from his face, and dark circles framed his eyes like bruises the sun couldn't reach. Daniel moved through the house like a soldier, alert, clenched, trying not to let the panic win. Greta noticed the moment she stepped into the room. Her smile faded the instant her eyes met Lucas's pale face. She crossed the floor, silently knelt beside the couch, and took his hand. His skin was clammy, his pulse faint. Greta didn't blink. "Daniel," she said calmly, her voice like a hymn. "I need a towel, a bowl of cool water, and the small flashlight from the drawer next to the fridge. Now, Daniel hesitated. Not in doubt, he just didn't know who she became in that moment. She wasn't the fragile, wandering woman who needed help crossing the street. She wasn't the soft-spoken guest who marveled at dandelions or pancakes. She was something else entirely. He moved fast. When he returned, Greta had already rolled up her sleeve, supporting Lucas's head with one hand and checking his pulse with the other. Daniel handed her the flashlight. She lifted Lucas's eyelid, flashing the light across his pupil, then looked up at Daniel. "How long has he had this condition?" "Since he was 8, Daniel said. "Some kind of congenital defect. It flares up usually when he's exhausted or cold. Doctors gave us a treatment plan, but we live on hope and heart monitors." Greta nodded once, as if filing the information into a mental cabinet. She soaked the towel, folded it, and laid it gently on Lucas's forehead. Then she leaned in close, her fingers lightly pressing against his wrist. "You're safe, sweetheart," she whispered. "You're going to feel better soon, I promise." Lucas blinked slowly. "Are you a nurse?" Greta smiled faintly. "Something like that." Daniel stood behind her, his hands shaking slightly, though he hid them in his pockets. He watched how precisely her fingers moved, how methodical her touch was. Not frantic, not guessing trained. It wasn't just instinct. It was memory. "What did you do?" he asked softly. Before all this, Greta didn't answer right away. She kept her eyes on Lucas, who was now breathing a little more steadily, his chest rising in slower, more even waves. Finally, she said, "I think I was someone who fixed things, people mostly." Daniel felt something shift in the room, as if the air had acknowledged the truth before it was spoken aloud. "You were a doctor," he said. Greta looked up at him, her eyes clear as polished glass. "I was more than that. I was a surgeon, pediatric cardiovascular. I spent most of my life trying to save children's hearts." Daniel exhaled, nearly staggered by the weight of it. And now she added gently, "A child's heart is saving mine." They sat in the living room until Lucas fell asleep, warm and pink-cheeked once again. Greta stayed beside him, humming something low and slow, an old lullaby. Daniel thought, though, the tune seemed half forgotten by the world. Daniel stepped into the kitchen to make tea, his hands moving on autopilot. When Greta joined him minutes later, he slid a mug across the counter. "I don't know how you remembered all that he said." "Neither do I," she replied. "It just came back, like muscle memory." Daniel leaned on the counter, studying her. "You were brilliant, weren't you?" She looked away, but he saw the pride flicker behind her modest smile. "I was," she admitted, "until I became inconvenient." Daniel frowned. "What do you mean?" "When Henry passed," she said slowly, "my board of directors, people I trusted, decided I wasn't stable. I took a leave of absence to grieve. They called it early decline, said my memory was slipping. I misplaced one file. One. Suddenly, I was a liability." She looked down at her tea, her voice dropping. "They took everything. My position, my clinic access, even my own name on the building." Daniel's chest ached. "They just discarded you. I didn't fight it," she said. "I didn't have the energy. I disappeared." Silence filled the room like snowfall. "I wasn't lost," she added. "I was buried." Later that evening, Daniel tucked Lucas into bed and returned to the porch. Greta sat there, wrapped in a quilt, watching the stars blink open one by one. "Why didn't you tell me before?" he asked, taking the chair beside her. Greta sighed, because being a doctor was who I was, and for a while I didn't know who I was without it. Daniel nodded slowly. "I know the feeling," he said. "When my wife died, I stopped being a husband, and for a while, I didn't know what kind of father I was either. I was just surviving." Greta looked at him, something like understanding passing between them. "You're more than surviving, Daniel. You're seeing people. That's rarer than you think." Daniel looked out into the night. "So are you, Greta." They sat together in the hush, two souls no longer invisible. Lucas found it on a Wednesday, tucked deep in the lining of the old overcoat Greta wore when she arrived. The morning had started like any other frost on the windows, toast half burnt, and Greta humming softly as she folded laundry with meticulous care. Daniel had gone to the garage to work on a neighbor's transmission, and Lucas, searching for his headphones, noticed a slight bulge near the hem of Greta's coat hanging by the door. Curious, he tugged at the fabric and felt something stiff and square. A seam had come loose, likely from age or wear. He reached inside and pulled out a small leather-bound journal, its corners soft with time, the spine cracked, the pages filled with a trembling script that felt both fragile and urgent. Lucas turned to the first page. The handwriting was neat, but unsteady, each line stretching to remember something important. "March 12th, I woke up today and didn't recognize the ceiling. For a moment, I forgot Henry is gone. Then it came flooding back like it always does. They've begun discussing transition options. That's code for removing me quietly. I know the language. I helped write it once." Lucas turned to the page. "April 5th, Langford Memorial no longer feels like home. It feels like a museum I'm not allowed to touch. My name is still on the East Wing. For now. If I leave, will anyone notice? If I disappear, will anyone wonder why a woman who built something with her life chose to vanish from it?" Lucas's hands trembled slightly as he closed the journal. He didn't understand all of it, but he understood enough. He ran outside coatless despite the chill and found Daniel beneath the raised hood of a pickup. "Dad," he said, breath catching. "You need to see this." Inside, they sat at the table. Greta had paused her folding and now looked down at the journal with a face gone still. "I wasn't snooping," Lucas said quickly. "It was just there, in the coat." "I didn't mean to," Greta raised a hand gently. "It's all right. I didn't know I still had it." Daniel flipped slowly through the pages. Most entries were brief. Fragments, really. Thoughts on memory, on betrayal, on legacy. But every page bled with the kind of honesty that only comes when no one else is listening. "This is your handwriting?" Daniel asked gently. Greta nodded. "I wrote to remember who I was. When the world began insisting I was someone else." Lucas pointed to a line underlined twice on the final page. "If I ever forget my name, I hope someone still remembers my kindness." Daniel's throat tightened. "We need to do something," he said. Greta tilted her head. "Like what? Find out who did this to you. Bring your name back to where it belongs." She smiled, but it was the kind of smile that only partially reached the eyes. Justice isn't always loud, Daniel. Sometimes it's just knowing who you are, even if no one else does. Lucas, ever the spark plug between generations, shook his head. "That's not enough. You helped people, right? Like a lot of people." Greta nodded. "Then they deserve to know you're still here." That afternoon, Daniel took the journal to the Ashbury Public Library. He spoke with Molly, the local librarian and part-time miracle worker, who had a knack for finding answers buried in microfilm and municipal records. 3 hours later, she called. "You're going to want to see this," she said. Daniel returned to find a manila folder on the counter and a look of barely restrained excitement on Molly's face. "She's not just Greta Langford," Molly whispered, glancing around. "She's Dr. Greta Langford, founder of the Langford Memorial Pediatric Heart Institute. Graduated top of her class at Yale Med. Published. Decorated. Taught at Stanford. Practically royalty in pediatric cardiology." Daniel opened the folder. There were articles, some recent, some yellowed with age. Photos of Greta beside smiling children, testimonials from grateful parents, a front-page feature titled, "The Woman Who Gave Kids Back Their Heartbeats." Then came a more recent headline dated just 6 months ago. Langford steps down amid cognitive decline rumors. A smaller line beneath family declines to comment. Daniel clenched his jaw. "She didn't step down," he murmured. "She was pushed." Molly nodded slowly. And then, forgotten. He stared at the last photo in the stack, Greta standing alone outside a courtroom, her expression hollow, her posture small. Not anymore, he thought. That evening, Daniel brought the folder home. He placed it gently in front of Greta, who studied each article as if reading someone else's obituary. When she looked up, tears filled her eyes, but not out of grief. "Thank you," she whispered. "You deserve more than thanks," Daniel said. "You deserve to be seen." She reached across the table and placed her hand over his. "I don't know how much time I have, how long the memories will hold, but I know no one's looked at me the way you do in a very long time." Daniel's voice softened. "You looked at my son the same way. Like he mattered." "He does," she said firmly. "So do you." The room was quiet after that. Not empty, just full of something unspoken and powerful. Later that night, Lucas tucked the journal beneath Greta's pillow, a small gesture of reverence. Then he wrote a note of his own and slipped it inside the cover. "Dear future Greta, if you ever forget again, I just want you to know you saved me once. That means you're a hero, and I'll never forget you. Lucas Brooks." The photograph surfaced quietly like a stone, skimming a pond, at first unnoticed, then creating ripples that refused to stop. It had been taken by a local high school student, a girl named Rachel, whose mother worked the early shift at Joe's Bakery. She'd snapped the picture with her phone, Daniel on his old silver bicycle, Greta sitting sideways on the back rack, wrapped in a scarf, and Daniel's flannel coat, the morning light catching the two of them just so. It looked like something out of time, like a Norman Rockwell painting passed through a modern lens. She posted it on the town Facebook page, with the caption, "He didn't look away. Maybe we shouldn't either." By noon, the photo had been shared hundreds of times. By evening, thousands. People in Ashbury started whispering Greta's name with reverence. The woman who appeared like a forgotten figure had become somehow the mirror through which the town saw its own neglect, and the man who helped her its conscience. Daniel found out when he went to the gas station the next morning and was greeted with a free coffee and a quiet nod from the clerk. "Thank you," the man said. "For what?" Daniel asked. The clerk just gestured to a small stack of printed copies of the photo sitting beside the register. Someone had added a new caption, "Kindness still lives here." At first, Daniel felt uneasy with the attention. He hadn't done anything heroic. He hadn't lifted a car off a child or saved a drowning person. He'd just seen someone really seen them and chosen not to walk away. But Greta understood what was happening long before he did. "This isn't about you," she said it over breakfast, stirring honey into her tea. "It's about what you reminded them was possible." Daniel shook his head. "I didn't remind them of anything. They were just waiting for someone else to go first." Greta smiled. "Then it's good you didn't wait." The ripple spread beyond niceties and free pastries. It became action. A young man named Jeff, who ran the local hardware store, started a campaign to build better wheelchair access in downtown shops. A retired teacher organized a Saturday soup kitchen in the church basement, something that hadn't existed in Ashbury for 20 years. Kids began helping elderly neighbors shovel snow and run errands, sometimes awkwardly, sometimes too enthusiastically, but always with heart. Greta watched it all from the porch, wrapped in her quilt, her eyes misty but alert. "They're not doing it for the photo anymore," she said one afternoon, as Lucas painted signs for the soup kitchen on cardboard scraps. "They're doing it because it feels good to matter." Still, not everyone in town was quick to change. There were whispers, skeptics. She's probably not who she says she is. He's milking this attention for something. Wait until the truth comes out. But for the most part, Ashbury softened. And in that softening, Greta began to heal not in body but in dignity. In the way her voice stopped trembling when she spoke. In how she touched Lucas's shoulder with the steadiness of someone who knew their worth. It was Lucas who suggested the sign. He and Daniel had been cleaning out the garage when Lucas found a spare wooden plank, roughly the size of a mailbox. He sanded it down, painted it white, and brought it inside. "We should put it out front," he said, holding it up proudly. The sign read in bold blue letters, "This house sees you." Daniel stared at it for a moment, then smiled. "That's actually perfect." Greta's voice came from the hallway behind them. "It's more than perfect. It's the truest thing I've heard in years." A few days later, Daniel received a phone call that knocked the air from his lungs. It was from a woman named Emma Langford. "My name may not mean anything to you," she said, "but I think you may be caring for someone very dear to me." Daniel stepped outside to take the call. Greta and Lucas, still inside, making bread pudding from an old recipe she claimed she'd half forgotten. "Emma Langford," he repeated. "You're her." Her granddaughter Emma confirmed, and her legal guardian technically. "We've been searching for her for months." Daniel's instincts kicked in. She doesn't want to go back to a facility. There was silence on the line, then a quiet breath. "I know," Emma said, "and I wouldn't ask her to. I just want to see her, to know she's okay, to apologize." Daniel paused. "You knew she was being forced out, didn't you?" "I did," Emma said. "And I didn't stop it. I thought, maybe they were right. Maybe her mind was going. Maybe it was time to let go." "And now," Daniel asked, "now I've seen the photo," Emma said, voice breaking. "And I realize we didn't lose her. We left her, and someone else chose to find her." That evening, Daniel sat beside Greta on the porch and told her about the call. Greta listened quietly. When he finished, she didn't speak for a long time. Then she whispered, "She was a little girl the last time I held her. I remember her laugh, but not her face. Isn't that strange?" "No," Daniel said gently. "It's human." Greta looked out toward the horizon where the sky was turning lavender and gold. "Do you think she'll see me?" "Not just visit, but really see me. I think she already has," Daniel said. "But I also think she needs to see the woman you are now." Greta turned to him. "And who's that?" He smiled. "The woman who saved a town without even trying." Emma Langford arrived on a Friday afternoon, just as the first spring rain began to mist the sidewalks of Ashbury. She stepped out of a sleek, black sedan that looked wildly out of place next to Daniel's rust-streaked pickup, her heels clicking softly on the wet concrete. She wore a dark green trench coat and carried an umbrella she didn't bother to open. Her posture was upright, purposeful, but her eyes were heavy, as though she carried more weight than the fabric of her coat could explain. Daniel met her at the edge of the porch, wiping his hands on a towel. "You made good time," he said. Voice calm but cautious, Emma nodded. "She's inside." "She is. But take a breath before you go in." He studied her face. "Whatever you remember, that's not all she is anymore." Emma's lips pressed into a tight line. "I'm not here to take her away." "I believe you," he said. "I just hope she does." Greta was seated in her usual chair by the window, knitting quietly, though the yarn pattern had long since gone awry. The rhythm of it calmed her, Daniel noticed, even if the product never came out quite right. When Emma entered, Greta didn't react at first. Her eyes remained on the window following raindrops as they chased one another down the glass. Then slowly her gaze shifted. Her knitting stopped. Emma removed her coat and stepped forward. "Hi, Grandma." The word landed softly like the flutter of a page being turned after too many years. Greta blinked. I know that voice. Emma knelt in front of her, tears already beginning to rise. It's me. It's Emma. Greta studied her. A long silence filled the room, so quiet they could hear the soft tick of the kitchen clock and the wind nudging the porch swing outside. Then Greta whispered, "You had the lisp." Emma laughed, a short, watery sound. "Only when I was nervous." Greta reached out and touched her cheek, fingertips shaking. "You hated Brussels sprouts." Emma smiled. "Still do." And then Greta said very softly, "I remember your laugh." Emma closed her eyes, as though hearing it again in her mind. Daniel gave them space, watching from the hallway, as two generations reconnected wordlessly at times, but with a current that didn't need words. Lucas watched, two seated on the stairs, with a bowl of cereal in his lap, his usual play-by-play commentary absent for once. When Emma finally rose, her expression had shifted, less composed, more real. She joined Daniel in the kitchen. "She's not just lucid," she said quietly. "She's clearer than I've seen her in years." Daniel poured 2 cups of coffee. "She's been that way since the day I found her." Emma looked down. "I should have listened. She needed space to be heard again," Daniel said. "Not managed. Not silenced." "I was scared," Emma admitted. "When my dad, her son, died, I didn't know how to handle her grief. She got quiet, forgetful. I thought she was slipping. And the board." She exhaled sharply. "They were looking for a reason to push her out. I didn't stop them. I was afraid they'd come for me too." Daniel didn't judge her. He could see the remorse in every word. "She never blamed you," he said. "But she never stopped missing you either." Later, the 3 of them sat around the table, Greta, Emma, and Daniel, while Lucas flipped grilled cheese sandwiches with exaggerated flair. "I could have you know," he said proudly. "I am the official lunch chef around here." Greta grinned. "That's only because I kept burning the bread." Details. Lucas shrugged, then looked at Emma. "You a doctor too, I am," she said. "Cardiologist." Greta's eyes lit up. "Like me." Emma nodded. "Because of you." A hush fell over the table. Greta's fingers gripped her teacup. "I always hoped someone would carry it forward," she said, "even if it wasn't with my name." Emma reached into her bag and pulled out a file folder. She slid it across the table toward Greta. "What's this?" Greta asked. "An amendment," Emma said. "The Langford Foundation Board has approved a motion to reinstate your name to the East Wing at the Children's Hospital." Greta stared at the folder. "I didn't ask for this," she whispered. "No," Emma said, "but you earned it. Every bit of it. And it's time the world remembered." After lunch, Greta and Emma walked slowly around the yard, umbrellas in hand. The rain had lightened to a drizzle, and the soil gave slightly beneath their feet. They paused by the small garden bed Lucas and Greta had started weeks earlier. "Do you remember planting these?" Emma asked. Greta looked down at the tiny shoots, green against the dark earth. "I remember dirt under my nails," she said. "And laughter. And someone handing me a trowel that still had a price sticker on it." Emma smiled. "Lucas," Greta nodded. "He reminded me what it feels like to matter." Emma looked at her grandmother, eyes shimmering. "You've always mattered. I just forgot how to show it." Greta reached out and took her hand. "We all forget sometimes. What matters is that we find our way back." That night, as the rain finally broke and stars emerged over Ashbury, Emma sat on the porch with Daniel while Greta dozed inside. "You care about her," Emma said. "She changed our lives," Daniel replied simply. "And you," Emma added. He nodded. "She reminded me how to be human again." Emma looked at him thoughtfully, then smiled. "She has a habit of doing that." They sat quietly for a moment, letting the breeze pass through them. She's not just your miracle, Emma said softly. She's mine too. It was Greta's idea to take one more ride. The morning air was crisp, but kind, the early light stretching long shadows across Ashbury's waking streets. She stood by the front porch, wrapped in her quilted coat, her posture straighter than usual. Her eyes, blue steady, found Daniel's and held them. "Would you ride with me again?" she asked. Daniel looked at the old silver bicycle leaning against the railing. Its tires were a little low, the seat cracked, one pedal slightly bent. Still it waited, just like it had that day on the street when no one else had stopped. He smiled. Of course. Lucas watched from the window, biting into an apple. "Want me to bring a first aid kit?" Greta chuckled. "Only if your dad drives like he did last time." They pedaled slowly, Daniel careful to avoid the potholes, Greta settled comfortably on the back with a blanket across her lap. The town looked different now. Windows seemed cleaner, faces more open. People waved, not out of obligation, but recognition. No one looked away anymore. Greta pointed. "That building there, the old post office, that's where I gave my first speech on pediatric care." 4 people showed up. One of them fell asleep. Daniel laughed. "And yet you kept going." Greta's voice turned gentle. "Because I believed every child's life was worth fighting for, even if the room was empty." They passed the town square, where children now chalked colorful drawings along the sidewalks. One of the signs read, "Kindness is contagious." Their destination was a small, overgrown lot on the edge of town. Once it had been home to a community garden before funding dried up and interest faded. Greta had mentioned it in passing weeks ago, recalling lavender bushes and rows of basil tomato plants heavy in summer. But now it was just weeds and cracked earth. Daniel set the bike down. Greta walked forward slowly, her boots crunching over brittle stems. "I used to come here when the hospital work overwhelmed me," she said. "Digging in the dirt made things feel simpler." Daniel stepped beside her. "You want to bring it back," she nodded. "Not as a garden, not exactly. As something more." He waited. "A place for children," she continued. "Not a hospital. Just a place to breathe. To remember how to laugh. For families who've forgotten what peace feels like. For tired parents. For kids in wheelchairs who want to see butterflies." Daniel's throat tightened. "You think Ashbury's ready for that?" Greta turned to him, her gaze unwavering. "Ashbury became ready the moment someone saw me on a sidewalk and didn't walk away." The next day, Emma joined them in drafting a proposal. Greta's memories came in bursts, some sharp, some foggy, but always threaded with purpose. Lucas named it. "How about the Langford Garden of Light?" Emma blinked. "That's actually beautiful," Greta beamed. "You have your grandfather's poetry in you." Lucas shrugged, cheeks red. "I just thought people could use a little more light." They submitted the plan to the town council, attached with Greta's handwritten note and Daniel's quiet endorsement. Within a week, approval came unanimously. Donations followed from local families, some of them patients Greta had once treated. Some complete strangers, moved by the story they'd read online. The land was cleared. Seeds were ordered. Volunteers arrived with gloves and shovels, including the high schooler who had taken the famous photo. She brought wildflower packets and hugged Greta like an old friend. One evening as they sat beneath the porch, Light Daniel handed Greta a sealed envelope. "It came today," he said. "From the board at Langford Memorial." Greta opened it slowly, fingers trembling only slightly now. Inside was a certificate printed on heavy parchment. "In honor of Dr. Greta Langford's unwavering service vision and compassion, the East Wing will henceforth be known as the Greta Langford Center for Pediatric Healing." She stared at the paper for a long moment, her eyes shining. "It's just a name," she whispered. Daniel shook his head. "It's a beginning." Greta looked down at her hands, once so skilled, now older, Gentler, but not useless. Never that. I thought they buried me, she said. They did, Daniel replied. But kindness doesn't stay buried. It finds a way back. That same night as stars bloomed over Ashbury, Daniel found Emma sitting in the backyard watching Lucas chase fireflies. She's stronger than I remembered, she said. She's who she's always been, Daniel replied, taking the seat beside her. Emma smiled. And you've given her more than a home. Daniel looked at her, his voice low. She gave me more than that first. Silence passed between them, comfortable now. There was a closeness that had grown over the past weeks, not rushed, not romantic, yet, but something true and promising. Emma turned to him. You know what I regret most. He raised a brow. What that I didn't get to meet the man who stopped everything to carry a stranger home. Daniel smiled, eyes soft. You're looking at him. Just a little dustier than in the photo. Emma reached over, brushed something from his sleeve. Dust looks good on you. They both laughed quietly, the night folding gently around them. Inside, Greta stood by the window, watching with the knowing gaze of someone who had lived long enough to recognize something rare. Two people slowly beginning to believe that love might find them again. The letter arrived in a cream-colored envelope with gold embossing along the edge, elegant, understated, like something from another era. It was addressed by hand, in the kind of cursive that schools no longer taught, but Greta's generation had learned with ink-stained fingers and posture-perfecting rulers. Daniel found it in the mailbox one breezy afternoon, nestled between a water bill and a discount flyer for lawn care. The envelope stood out, its quiet grace somehow louder than the advertisements shouting around it. He carried it inside with a feeling he didn't yet understand. Greta was sitting at the kitchen table, her knitting needles resting beside a glass of lemonade, one strand of yarn trailing across the table, like a lifeline in progress. She took the envelope and studied the return address. Langford Foundation. New York. She smiled softly. Then, without drama or delay, she opened it. Inside was a letter on heavy stationery, and beneath it, a small brass key attached to a ribbon, the color of spring rain. Emma sat beside her, having arrived that morning, with a suitcase and a week's worth of plans to help with the garden project. Lucas leaned in across the table, his chin resting on his palm. Greta unfolded the letter, her hand steady. Her voice, when she read aloud, was clear. Dearest Greta, what we take from the world is never as important as what we leave behind. You reminded us through your absence, and then your miraculous return, that healing has many forms. Sometimes it's a scalpel. Sometimes it's a bicycle. And sometimes it's a boy who hands you a paintbrush and tells you to plant light in a forgotten field. Lucas beamed. Enclosed is the key to the Langford Retreat House, a property you purchased privately decades ago and never used. The board voted unanimously to transfer its future to your vision. Use it to build what you spoke of, not a clinic, not a hospital, but a refuge, a garden of laughter, a home for hope. With reverence, Margaret Whitfield, Chairwoman, Langford Foundation. Greta folded the letter carefully, then looked down at the key in her hand. I'd forgotten about that property, she murmured. Emma smiled. But you didn't forget your dream. Daniel was quiet, watching her with something like awe. Greta, this woman he had once helped off a cold sidewalk, was now offering something he hadn't dared imagine, a legacy for the broken-hearted. A place for people like him and Lucas, a chance for others to begin again. The next week became a flurry of motion. They drove out to the property just beyond the edge of Ashbury, a modest farmhouse with ivy creeping along the porch rails and a windmill that hadn't turned in years. The land stretched behind it in soft hills and clusters of birch trees, with a distant view of the river glinting silver in afternoon light. Lucas ran through the tall grass like it was a kingdom. Emma took photos of the structure, already envisioning blueprints and adaptive designs for children with mobility challenges. Greta walked the land slowly, her hand grazing every surface wood barkstone, as if memorizing it through touch. Daniel stayed quiet for most of it, his hands in his jacket pockets, eyes sweeping across the sky. He wasn't sure what he felt. Hope, maybe. Or perhaps something even rarer belonging. Later that night after dinner, Greta called him onto the porch. She held the brass key in her hand and looked out at the quiet town below. "Do you know why I chose you?" she asked. Daniel was startled. "Chose me?" "To hold all of this," she said. "The vision, the story, the future." He shrugged. "I didn't think you did. I thought it just happened." Greta shook her head gently. "It happened because you stopped. Because when no one else saw me, you did. And more than that, you stayed." She pressed the key into his palm. "This doesn't belong in a vault or a glass case. It belongs in your hands." Daniel looked down at the key, its edges worn from age, but still shining faintly in the porch light. "I don't have experience with building places," he said. Greta smiled. "You've been building one since the day you brought me home." He swallowed hard, the lump in his throat too stubborn to ignore. I was trying to do what was right, and in doing so," she said, "you made room for miracles." The next morning, Daniel found a large envelope slipped under his door. It was from Emma. Inside was a hand-drawn sketch of the garden they'd all spoken of. In soft pencil lines, it showed raised beds shaped like butterflies, a small amphitheater shaded by apple trees, a winding path with benches named after patients and donors. At the bottom was a note in Emma's looping cursive: "Hope isn't a place. It's a decision we make. Let's build it together." Daniel turned the paper over. There was a second note. "P.S. Dinner. Just us, I owe you that much, and more." He smiled, folded the paper slowly, and set it beside the key on the table. Greta's legacy wasn't only in medicine or memory. It was now in every ripple spreading outward through Emma's healing, through Lucas's growing heart, and through Daniel himself, who'd started this journey just trying to do the right thing, and found along the way that kindness often leaves the strongest foundations. The day of the dedication began with a sky so blue it seemed painted, and a breeze so soft it felt rehearsed. It was as if the heavens themselves had been briefed on the schedule. Cars began to arrive by mid-morning, slowly populating the gravel drive that curved gently toward the newly restored Langford Retreat House. The farmhouse had been cleaned, repainted a soft ivory, with green shutters and wide wraparound porches lined with flower boxes Lucas had helped fill. The garden in back had come alive, wildflowers dancing between smooth, accessible pathways and benches shaded by newly planted maple trees. But the real magic waited inside. Visitors were ushered through wide double doors into a space that smelled of lavender and old wood, clean and calm. The first room on the left had no plaque, no official title. It didn't need one. The room with the bicycle spoke for itself. There in the center of the space stood Daniel's old silver bike, cleaned, polished, but unchanged. The leather seat still cracked, the rear rack still slightly bent. Draped over the handlebars was the same flannel coat Greta had worn that day. It looked as though the two could roll out again at any moment and change the course of a life. Mounted on the wall above was a single framed photograph, Daniel and Greta on that long-ago ride, her small and bundled in the back, his shoulders hunched against the cold, his eyes looking forward, but his body holding so much more than weight. Below the photo, etched into a brass plate, he carried kindness on 2 wheels, and the world followed. People moved through the exhibit quietly, many wiping their eyes, others just pausing, with a hand pressed to their chest. Some brought flowers, some brought stories. One elderly man knelt beside the bike and whispered, "Thank you," as if to the machine itself. Daniel stood in the corner, uncomfortable in the spotlight, but proud nonetheless. Greta, seated nearby, watched with a gentle detachment, as if she were both participant and observer, no longer needing to claim the past, because the present had finally caught up with her. Emma walked beside her, helping her adjust her shawl. "They're not here for me," Greta whispered. Emma leaned in. "No, Grandma. They're here because of you." Greta's eyes softened. "That's not the same thing." "No," Emma agreed. "It's better." Outside, the sun warmed the open lawn where folding chairs had been arranged for the dedication ceremony. A small stage had been built beneath the shade of an old oak, and Lucas stood beside it, nervously flipping note cards in his hands. Daniel approached and crouched beside him. "You okay, Lucas?" whispered. "What if I mess up?" Daniel smiled. "Then you'll be real. And that's always better than perfect." Lucas took a deep breath and nodded. "Okay." Emma joined Daniel, her hand brushing his as she stood beside him. It wasn't dramatic, wasn't bold, but it was deliberate. Greta was helped to the front row, her hands folded in her lap, her gaze sweeping the crowd like a shepherd, counting her flock. The mayor of Ashbury stood first, offering brief remarks about community, about second chances, about kindness rediscovered. Then it was Lucas's turn. He stepped up to the microphone, cleared his throat, and looked out at the crowd. His voice was small but steady. "My name is Lucas Brooks. I'm 12. A few months ago, my dad stopped to help someone on the street. A lot of people walked by her. But he didn't. He paused. I didn't know then that she would change everything. Not just for us, but for a lot of people. She taught me how to grow flowers, how to make pancakes without burning them, how to sit quietly and just be okay." He looked toward Greta. "She made us better. So now we made this place to help other people feel better too." That's all I wanted to say. The crowd erupted in gentle applause. Greta's eyes shimmered. Daniel stepped up next. He didn't have note cards. He didn't need them. "I'm not a man who usually gives speeches," he began. "I fix engines. I pack school lunches. I try to make it through the day without running out of gas or patience." Soft laughter rippled through the rows. But then one day, I saw someone who'd been forgotten, and I didn't look away. I didn't know what that moment would become. I only knew I couldn't leave her there. He looked at Greta. She came into our lives quietly, but she brought with her something I didn't even realize we were missing: purpose. He turned back to the audience. "This retreat is not about medicine or miracles, though we've seen both. It's about presence. It's about showing up. It's about kindness that doesn't keep score." He stepped away from the microphone, applause following him like light. After the ceremony, the crowd dispersed into garden paths and sunlit porches. Children played with bubble wands. Volunteers served iced tea. Local musicians played acoustic guitar beneath a sycamore tree. Greta sat quietly beneath an awning, Emma beside her. Daniel joined them, bringing a plate of fresh fruit. "Did we do okay?" he asked. Greta smiled. "You did everything I never thought possible." Emma looked at him, then back at her grandmother. "We couldn't have done any of this without you." Greta leaned back, closed her eyes, and took in the breeze. "Funny," she said. "I came here with nothing. No name. No memory. Just exhaustion." Daniel nodded. "But you left something bigger behind." Greta opened her eyes and looked at him. "I left it with the right people." As the sun began to dip, Emma and Daniel stood side by side at the edge of the property, looking over the newly planted garden rows. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" Emma asked. "That depends," Daniel said. Are you thinking that maybe this whole thing isn't finished yet?" She nodded. Not by a long shot. He smiled. Then yes. She reached out and took his hand. No rush. No declarations. Just a quiet beginning, like a seed that knows spring will come again. Autumn arrived like a long-held breath, finally released, painting the trees around the Langford retreat house in hues of rust and gold. The wind had a gentler touch, now, less urgent, more reflective, carrying the smell of dried leaves and cinnamon from the kitchen porch. It had been 6 months since the dedication ceremony. In that time, the garden had bloomed beyond expectation. Butterflies had returned. So had laughter. Families came from towns over some for a weekend of rest, others for quiet healing in the company of strangers who quickly became friends. Grief was welcomed, but never allowed to linger uninvited. Hope, as Lucas had once said, had a room of its own. Greta Langford had moved into the farmhouse in June, occupying the sunniest upstairs bedroom. Her mind, though still prone to soft fogs, had moments of startling clarity, especially when Lucas quizzed her on flower types, or Emma showed her the progress reports from the Langford Foundation's new mobile outreach clinics. That morning, she sat by the upstairs window wrapped in a quilt, watching Emma and Daniel work side by side in the garden, below hands' dirty faces sunlit. She held a pen in her fingers, and beside her sat a new leather journal. The old one had been sealed and stored its pages too sacred now to reopen. She wrote slowly, one line at a time, each letter a kind of farewell. "I came here a ghost. I leave with footprints, not because I fought to be remembered, but because someone remembered me when I couldn't. This garden is not mine. It never was. It belongs to kindness. And kindness always finds its way back." That afternoon, Greta asked Daniel for one final favor. "Take me into town," she said, "but not in a car." He grinned. "You want the bike?" She nodded. "Just once more." So he wheeled the old silver bicycle out from the retreat's small exhibit room, where it had stood on display for months. He oiled the chain, tightened the rear bolts, dusted the seat. Then slowly, and with great care, he helped her onto the back rack, just as he had that first day. She was smaller now, lighter somehow, but the strength in her eyes hadn't dimmed. They rode into town through streets half emptied by the approaching dusk. People waved, paused their conversations, some even placed hands over their hearts. Daniel and Greta didn't speak. They didn't need to. The ride was its own prayer. He took her down Main Street past the bakery, the hardware store, the church with the crooked steeple, and then instead of heading home, he turned into the old town square, where a modest stone pedestal now stood near the fountain. There, etched in bronze, were the words Lucas had once painted on a wooden sign, "This house sees you." Beneath it, a simple dedication. In honor of every life overlooked and every person who chose to see. Daniel helped Greta down, and they stood together for a long moment, watching the breeze move through the maple trees. "Do you believe in full circles?" she asked. "I believe in second chances," Daniel replied, "and in first steps that change everything." Greta smiled. "You were both for me." 3 weeks later, Greta passed away quietly in her sleep, the journal still on her nightstand, her final entry signed with a steady hand. "Thank you for not walking past me." Her funeral was held in the retreat garden. It wasn't a sorrowful affair, though there were tears. The service was filled with music. Greta loved soft jazz, Appalachian hymns, and the sound of children's laughter drifting in from the nearby playground. Emma spoke first, her voice firm and warm. She told stories of a grandmother who'd given everything to others, then found herself again in the act of being seen. Lucas followed, holding the flannel coat she had worn on the bike ride. She wasn't a superhero, he said, but she was kind. And kind people. They're the ones who save the world and don't even realize it. Daniel was the last to speak. I found her when the world didn't, he said. But the truth is, she found me too. I thought I was rescuing her. Turns out she was reminding me of the kind of man I still had a chance to become. Months passed. The seasons turned again. The garden grew wilder, fuller, more beautiful in its imperfection. Emma and Daniel began spending more time together, at first in shared projects, then in shared silence, then in shared evenings by the fireplace where plans turned into promises. One October morning, Lucas slipped and called Emma Mom without realizing it. She cried afterward, not because it was a mistake, but because it wasn't. Daniel kept the bicycle in his workshop now. It no longer needed to be displayed. It had already carried its message as far as it needed to go. And every so often, when the wind was just right, he would take it out for a ride not toward anything in particular, just forward. Always forward. One quiet morning, a new child arrived at the retreat. A girl no older than 8, with a backpack too big for her shoulders and eyes too tired for her age. Her parents had died the year before. She hadn't spoken more than a sentence in months. Lucas met her at the gate. "Come on," he said, offering his hand. "This place sees you." She looked up at him, and for the first time in a long while she smiled. And maybe that's the quiet miracle of it all, that kindness doesn't need to be loud to echo across lives. If this story touched your heart, we'd love to hear from you. Let us know in the comments, where in the world are you watching from today? It's always a joy to see how far these small moments of humanity can travel. And if you'd like to be part of more stories like this, genuine, heartfelt, and full of hope, feel free to subscribe. There's always room here for one more kind soul. From our heart to yours, thank you for spending your time with us today. We're truly honored to share this journey with you. Until next time, stay kind, stay hopeful, and take care.